KJB believer. He cites Galatians 5:14. Well, let's look at that one. Galatians 5:14, and then we'll make Hal do some exegesis on this passage.
Well,
for all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Oh, yes.
yeah.
This, in one book I had been reading, love thy neighbor has become in Christendom the catch-all to manipulating you into doing stuff they want you to do. Love thy neighbor means you need to support this political objective. Love thy neighbor means you need to take the jabby, pokey, pokey. Love thy neighbor means you need to do this and this and this and this. It has been the means. It has been twisted into a way of manipulating believers. Now, what would you argue would be the point of that verse, Pastor, to love thy neighbor as thyself? How would you exegete that?
Well, what purpose did the law serve? I mean, we know through Paul's writings that the law basically condemns us. But there was a period of time when the law represented the righteousness of God. That's the reason he says, now the righteousness of God without the law is manifest.
Right.
So, we live under a different standard, under a different program during a different period of time. The dispensing of God's grace, we live on a different basis. But still, the law was the representation in that period of time for the righteousness of God. And if you want to take the righteousness and character of God, what would be the acme characteristic would be love. And what is the very first commandment? What, to love thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind? Is that not it? So, Paul spends a great deal of time talking about having a character of righteousness, but our character and our righteousness does not come from the law. It comes from the life of Christ in the believer. It is the first fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, etc., etc. So, in that particular sense, as we walk in the Spirit, as we live in grace, as we are empowered by our life in Christ, we actually exhibit God's character, and the law has nothing to do with it.
Right. Now, in the context of the law of Moses, I think it goes back to Leviticus 19:18. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And one of the first points you got to make is, when you're quoting the law, you love thy neighbor as thyself. You're talking about the Israelites loving their kinsmen in the flesh. You also have in Matthew 22:38, the Lord repeats this law. And I would just suggest that the point in those passages isn't that the Jews would love their sinful selves or their sinful corrupted bodies, because, loving your neighbor as yourself has nothing to do with you loving your corrupted self. The point was, I think, that they loved themselves because of who and what they were, what God made them to be as his chosen people in a covenant relationship with him. There is a sense of identification in that love thy neighbor as thyself. And that, even with us, loving your neighbor as yourself, loving yourself would be loving, I would argue, who you are in Christ, loving that new man, loving what God made you in his son. That's what you love. And thus you would love your neighbor as much as that, for the sake of edifying the saints in the same sense that the Jews would edify their kinsmen in the flesh, who are also their neighbors. And it's very possible our neighbors in the age of grace, Paul could mean everyone, But I suspect the context is just is probably saints, as it would be in the context in the Old Testament. We are loving fellow saints to that same degree that we love everything that God has made us in His Son. There's a degree of love to them for this, all the same reasons you love who you are in Christ, or something like that.
Yeah, well, it's in the context there in Galatians 5. You brethren, you've been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Isn't that a theme that
Right.
you're also bringing forth out of the passages as you talk to in the law? The issue
Right.
is how we relate one to another. Do you love God?
That's right.
How do you demonstrate your love for God?
That's right. That's a great point.
You love your brother, you love your neighbor.
Yep.
And the issue is not about you doing what's best for you, but doing what's best for them. That's what love does.
Love itself is what dictates your behavior, not the law.
Yes.
Love determines how you treat someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I love that point. Oh, I'm gonna have to use that on the Shorewood Zoom call. I may or may not give you credit, Pastor.
That's fine. It can't be original with me anyway. I have no original thoughts.